Phyllis's next guest has achieved the certification Master Gardener. Veronica Steffensmeier, a former journalist, has been a great source of inspiration and instruction to her community and beyond. She is deeply concerned about food security in the United States and the world. She is worried that we may see more and more empty shelves and high prices for food. She is committed to sharing the importance and the joy of growing food.
You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
We've been impacted by several things in the United States. One is our viable soil is no longer viable. It's lost a lot of its nutrients over the years. It's depleted. It's over-farmed. It's full of toxic pesticides. So we're not growing food that really produces nutrients. Another problem is we've lost 70% of our bee population. Now, this is epic because bees pollinate our food. So that means a severe reduction in the amount of food we're going to be producing. Weather has impacted food severely. And weather has changed. The zone I live in is now warmer in the summer, but we have these cold drops of temperature in the spring. That's confused the bees because you go from extreme hot to extreme cold when they're pollinating. And we have an excessive amount of storms. Just last night, a series of storms and tornadoes went through my area again. So all of these things are having a drastic impact on food. And now to complicate all of that, we're adding tariffs to food that comes in from certain countries like Mexico. So people could conceivably be paying $5 for a tomato in the near future.
That is scary stuff. There were times in our history when everyone was encouraged to plant a garden. During World War II,
Right, a victory garden.
the victory gardens. So it sounds like you have that idea as well. But let's talk about why you became a master gardener. What made you decide to become a master gardener?
That was a decision based on where I relocated to. I lived in Europe for 43 years. I knew the climate there. And when we moved to the United States, we moved to the South. I now live in Georgia. I didn't know the soil. I didn't know the weather. I didn't know how to grow food there. And when I found out about the Master Gardener program, that's a program that teaches you everything you need to know about almost about botany, about growing food, about horticulture as well. And it was a crash course. I took it during the summertime. It was 5 days a week from 9 to 3. And I had to score high on midterms and exams. And once you qualify, you learn everything about grass, about pest management, everything you can conceivably learn if you were studying agriculture. And it just helped me in the beginning learn how to do my own garden. But once I got into it, I found my niche and I became so engrossed in it. I started fulfilling the requirements of 25 hours of community service a year to stay certified. So I fill those 25 hours of requirements by teaching others and giving classes on how to grow food in containers.
So growing food, this is great because not everybody has a lot of land to grow food, but you've actually specialized in growing food in containers as well. So can you talk about what's different about growing food in containers besides the fact that they're in containers? What makes it, what kinds of actions do you need to take differently?
What I appreciated about that was knowing I could garden well into my senior years. If you're 75, you don't want to be digging in Georgia clay. Trust me, it's hard as a rock. So when I thought I could get very inexpensive, they look like giant round shopping bags. They're made of a heavy canvas. They come in all sizes and styles. They're very inexpensive. They're permeable. You can put them anywhere in your garden where you have sun. You can take them away in the winter if you don't want to use them. You can put them on a terrace. They come in a variety of sizes. It was the convenience. And once you get into gardening, if you're growing a food that needs a high acidic soil, well, you can simply have a grow bag that has soil where you treat it with a high acidic fertilizer. So you can really customize what you're growing with the nutrient needs for each vegetable. And if you get a disease in the soil, well, you simply dump out the bag and start all over again. You can't do that in the ground or in a raised bed, because exchanging soil out of a raised bed, that's a lot of work.
I don't want to give any commercial time to any stores, but it sounds like you spend a lot of time in Home Depot or Lowe's.
I spend a lot of time online as well, because a lot of things, if I want a particular size grow bag, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be stocked in one of the box stores. So I have different gardening supply companies that I subscribe to. I wait for things to go on sale. If you want to grow a tomato, people don't realize tomatoes are a vine. So you can grow them horizontally or vertically. They're a vine. They're going to grow as long as you let them grow. You can end up with a 15 or 20-foot tomato vine. So most people want to grow them vertically. So you need a trellis. You're not going to find a trellis. If you're growing an 8 to 10-foot tomato, you're not going to find that trellis at a box store. You're going to have to go to a specialized nursery for garden supplies to buy it.
Okay, for the folks like me who may not know what a trellis is, because you're growing vertically, the tomatoes have to grow and attach to something in
Right,
a vertical position.
right.
So that's right. Otherwise, it's a mess, I would
Right, so
gather.
you need vegetable supports.
Vegetable supports. So, I think this also requires patience and faith. I've never really engaged in planting or being interested in watching things grow. Um, do you think you have an extraordinary amount of patience, or have you figured out a system to grow different things at different times?
I think a lot of it has to do with tenacity. You have to hang in there. I recommend people start small. And it's like cooking. You have recipes for growing food, you have recipes for baking a cake. So you start out with a very simple cake and something that's easy to bake. You don't start out with a 6-layer wedding cake. So you don't try to put in a farm all at once. And that's what I love about grow bags, because you can add to them. I recommend people start off with 3 or 4 different grow bags, grow 3 or 4 different foods. It depends on the climate you live in. I'm in the South. So it's very hot. My average temperature in the summer from June until September is above 85. So there are limited things that you can grow in this type of heat. We grow tomatoes, eggplant, squash, corn, beans, certain lettuces will grow. And most people who are starting out will rely on their box stores to get their starter plants. I start all my things from seed, but that's a process I grew into. So you can actually put your garden together in a couple of hours on a Saturday morning. If you buy 4 grow bags, you can buy container soil in a bag. Simply go to your box store, decide you're going to grow an eggplant, a pepper, a tomato, and a cucumber. So you have 4 inexpensive trellises, and you get started by simply planting your store-bought plant in your soil. And there are lots of classes that teach you how to plant things. Tomatoes are planted differently. It's the one thing that you would plant very deep in the soil, almost to the very tip of the plant when you buy it, because that produces a really strong root system, so that when that plant starts growing out of that container, it's going to have a firm foundation.
You're amazing. I'm just bowled over. I want people to know that probably you and I go back. You're probably my longest friend.
That's
We've been friends well over 50 years. So I'm kind of thrilled to see you have this passion that you've devoted yourself to. But your father was also into gardening, and Did he have any influence on your decision to pursue this?
I lived in Europe from 1981 until about 2017, and my dad got into gardening after I had left the country.
Uh-huh.
And he grew tomatoes. He loved collard greens. And I think he grew them so that he could have as many as he wanted. He bought a special little freezer to store them in after he harvested them. And he grew peppers. And my uncle, his brother, was also an avid grower. But this is something they actually started doing later in life, although both of them grew up on a farm.
Uh-huh. So let's talk to people who, in fact, live in apartments, because you have another passion, which is canning and preserving. Why did you get into learning how to preserve food?
That started when COVID hit because we had a shortage of vegetables. They were very hard to find in our area. I didn't want to get into canning. That involved buying a pot with a pressure unit that I was afraid of. So I looked at other means of storing food. And, our ancestors used to ferment things, and fermenting is as easy as it's the easiest method of preserving food because it's simply putting food in a salt water bath with different seasonings and sealing it up tightly, making sure the food doesn't rise out of the water, and become contaminated. So you buy your regular canning jars, like your ball jars, and you clean your vegetables, let's say carrots, you peel them and chop them and clean them. You put them in the jar, and then you add it's about a teaspoon of salt per cup of water, and you warm the water slightly, and you can add whatever seasoning your heart's desire, onion, garlic. I love to ferment my carrots with ginger that I grow and a little bit of dill, and that'll sit on your kitchen counter for several years. So
That's
when COVID hit, I ran to the supermarket. I bought up all these vegetables, and I bought canning jars, and I simply fermented them in salt water.
so, this is really helpful because you could stock up on vegetables. You don't necessarily have to grow them, but you could store food or preserve food for
Yeah,
yourself and your family.
right.
So you've taken a real passion about teaching people how to do this. Is this an expensive activity?
It is, I would say no, not expensive in terms of investing a lot of money. You can buy anywhere from a 5-gallon cloth grow bag up to a raised bed bag.
Oh, I'm not talking about the grow bags. I'm talking about the process of preserving and fermenting because I'm
No,
still
not
thinking
salt.
of
We're
the
talking
people,
about salt and water. So
salt
let's
and
say
water and the jars.
right. The jars are about your only investment. You want to get good canning jars. I like, there's a company out of Italy. Those jars are very hard to find. Remember there we have beer bottles that have a little metal, sort of a little metal handle, and you have to lift that handle, and it's a suction bottle. You can get canning jars like that. Those are my favorite. They come out of Italy. The glass is very heavy. They're hard to find and they are expensive, but you can usually pick up regular Ball canning jars in your supermarket.
Okay. Would a mason jar also be the same thing?
That's basically what a ball jar is. It's a version of a mason canning jar. So once you have your jars, I buy glass weights that you put on top of the food to keep it down because it comes out of the salt water, it'll mold. So you just want to make sure your food is weighted down. Some people just go out to the garden and find a rock. So anything that'll weight your food down in that jar while it's fermenting is good to have.
Because it's got to stay under the water,
Right.
is
It
what
has
you're
to stay
saying.
under the water.
Okay, so you've said tomatoes a lot are easy to grow. Um,
No, they're not easy to grow.
all
They
right.
are the vegetable that people grow the most.
Okay, so what's the easiest vegetable to grow?
Every vegetable has its pluses and minuses. Cucumbers are very easy to grow, but you're up against the environment. So, There are pests, there are diseases, and if you plant it, they will come. That's what you're really dealing with. If we didn't have garden pests and garden diseases, food would grow in unbelievable abundance. So keeping your food pest and disease free, that's the challenge. That's where the most knowledge comes in, what you have to learn about. How do I fertilize food? How do I treat it with a pesticide? Am I growing organically? Am I willing to use chemicals? These are all decisions you have to learn and make.
Okay, so now a lot of people buy these portable herb gardens. They like to grow their herbs. Have you engaged in growing herbs at all?
I grow herbs. I grow all of my garlic. I grow all of my ginger. I grow my turmeric, my basil, rosemary, and thyme. I grow herbs that I use a lot. And I grow mint. But I
So,
don't, portable herb gardens, and a vegetable garden is so easy to start. You simply need a pot that's going to accommodate all of your herbs. The only one I put in a separate pot is mint because mint is very invasive. So you do not want to grow it with your other herbs. It will come back the next year and simply overtake the pot. And I put my rosemary in a separate pot because rosemary will continue to grow into a really large bush. So I'll have to repot it every several years. But everything else is just a question of having a large pot and growing I grow all of my basil. I also grow that in a separate pot because I grow a lot of basil. I like to make pesto and freeze it for the winter.
all right, but I'm still thinking of those people now in apartments listening to you, and they might have to plant something in a window box. What would you suggest? Can they plant herbs in a window box?
Absolutely, as long as it gets at least 4 hours of sun a day.
So, on a spiritual note, what happens? I know you're a deeply spiritual person. What has this process meant to you when you see the plants coming out and blooming in front of you, bursting forth? Does that fill you in any particular way?
It's rebirth for me. It's rebirth every year. The garden goes dormant in the winter. We put things away. We cover everything with mulch and leaves. And by the time winter comes and it's ready, I'm ready to put my garden to rest, I'm exhausted. And I'm actually picking my last peppers, my last few tomatoes, and I'm ready to take a break. But the anticipation of all of that coming back to life again for me is absolutely fascinating to watch buds come onto trees, to watch leaves pop out. It just fascinates me that all of these things are reborn. And now I'm getting into a whole new area of gardening. I've started to go back and look at what our ancestors grew, and I'm looking at vegetables that are actual perennials. Now, a perennial is any flower or bulb or plant that comes back every year, like a tulip. And there are perennial vegetables that you don't have to plant again that come back year after year after year. And a lot of these are forgotten vegetables that used to be grown years ago that people have never heard of. Italy has a tradition of growing wonderful vegetables that have been around for hundreds of years. There are 50 or 60 or 100 different types of squash. If you go to our supermarket, there's one variety. But the advantage of growing your own food from seed is you can have varieties of food that you will never see in a supermarket. I grow a squash that can grow up to 5 feet long.
Oh
It
my
can last
goodness.
6 to 7 months in a cool area. I can pick it in
Wait,
August,
wait, let's slow down. You can grow a squash that's 5 to 6 feet
five
long,
feet to six
and
feet.
this is not going to rot like the next
No,
2 days.
I have done an experiment and left it on my kitchen counter for 7 months and still eat
Really?
it. Yes. And that's what fascinated me with growing food that you can store long term. This was an Italian squash that's been growing in Italy for hundreds of years. Our squash is always attacked by a moth, and that moth lays an egg that turns into something called the squash vine borer. It's every gardener's nightmare. You will have a wonderful zucchini squash plant, and the next morning the entire thing will collapse. because there's a worm that will burrow into the plant and eat it from the inside and collapse it overnight. No matter what I did, I could not. And once it's in your soil, you have to change out your soil. So I decided I love zucchini. I love to spiralize it, slice it and stuff it, bake it, fry it. It's my favorite summer vegetable. You can eat it raw. So I started looking for varieties that were impervious to this vine borer. And I
Aha.
came across the rampicante, and it's called zucchini rampicante or trombone squash because if you grow it in the ground, it's going to curl like a trombone. And if you grow it, I grow it vertically. I don't have enough space to grow it in the ground. So I grow it on 10-foot trellises so that it grows straight down. And that way I can slice it like into sizes of a
Wait a
regular
minute, you're going too
squash.
fast for a novice. Hold on. So you said you grow it straight down. Where do
Right.
you
I
put the
grow it on a
seed?
trellis, a long
Right.
trellis. And I
But
let
where
it,
do
and I
you
tie it
grow?
to the trellis as it's growing,
Okay.
so that it's growing vertically rather than horizontally along the
Okay.
ground.
All right.
And I
I
grow
know.
everything that way. I grow watermelons horizontally.
That's I can see your joy in this. I can hear the rebirth. But again, you're committed to having people understand what they can do. Now, I also know that you've been looking at Amish practices and reading books about the Amish people who are marvelous farmers. What have you learned by reading the Amish practices?
There are wonderful ways to grow and preserve food that they use. They have, there's a recipe that I came across called a salad in a jar, a tomato salad in a jar. And you don't even have to grow the tomatoes. You simply buy store-bought tomatoes, you wash them, you quarter them, and it's that simple fermenting method. You put them in water with salt and seasonings. I like onion and garlic, and that tomato will keep a certain firmness for at least up to 1 to 2 years. They
Really?
have a method where they'll soak the tomatoes in the salt water for several hours and the fluid will come out. Well, then they'll boil that fluid with even more spices and then put that back in the jar to ferment it. So if you Google tomato salad on YouTube, you're going to get different wonderful ways to season those tomatoes. And I love the idea of having a tomato that I can eat as a salad in the middle of December, or when tomatoes are costing $5 a piece, or when tomatoes in the worst case scenario are no longer available.
Well, I just, I am so grateful that you have devoted yourself to this. I think you're helping many, many people who may have to really resort to what you're talking about if prices go up and if we can't get our usual food from Mexico. So I think this is a service to humanity.
So I teach people who want to grow old gardening. I teach people who are not capable of taking a shovel and digging up a garden. I teach people who may be in a wheelchair. They may have arthritis. I have a bad knee. I have a bad back. So I had to find a way for me to garden comfortably and to be able to garden well into my later years. So growing things vertically, growing things in grow bags, I have my garden planted so that I can sit on a nice garden stool and garden everything by sitting. And some of my containers are waist height so that I can stand and comfortably garden. So I want people to have an experience that meets their physical abilities. And there are wonderful ways to adapt gardening for people who are aging. I've even thought about, I have a friend who's visually impaired, and I've thought about herb gardens that have certain smells that people who don't see and who can feel leaves and tell the difference between a basil leaf and a rosemary leaf so that they can grow their own herb gardens. So it might be harder them to grow a tomato because they may not see the disease attacking it. But herbs don't really get attacked by disease. But you can tell the difference between a mint leaf just by smelling it or tasting it, or lavender. So I've thought about scent gardens that people who are visually impaired could grow.
Um, In closing, what do you think we should be teaching in schools? If you had an impact on education regarding this subject, what's a good practice for young people to begin having an appreciation of the soil and growing? What
One
plants would you start with?
Well, one thing the master gardeners do is we go into schools, we go into elementary schools, we start raised bed gardens for them. We have teachers who'll take over the responsibility, and we teach those kids hands-on how to grow vegetables. So a lot of churches are starting to do this as well. We have community gardens everywhere that we support. We have gardens that support food banks. So if you're starting in a school with a community garden or a raised bed garden, you're going to start with simple things like herbs and tomatoes and cucumbers. And I would avoid squash in the South because we have that moth that affects them. But salads are really easy to grow and quick and fast. Things like spinach and lettuce. Radishes are very easy to grow. Planting beans is wonderful because you simply need a pack of beans, and like Jack and the Beanstalk, you stick them in the soil about a half an inch down, and in 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to see beans popping up.
So now, what's the next challenge for you? I mean, you've learned all this stuff. You're the master gardener. You really have a handle on this. Is there some special thing you want to try growing that you haven't tackled yet? Is there a new area that you're looking into?
Yes, and that's called hydroponic growing and growing in water towers. It's called aeroponics, and that is a way to garden indoors and all season long. And you simply have these long towers of tubular material, and they're sitting in a giant base of water. And the water, you have to buy special seeds, start those seeds in a special pallet that's, produced for these particular companies. And once you plant those seeds, and they look like little pockets. If you imagine a tree with pockets, you're planting a seed in each pocket. You can grow entire cabbages in these water towers. You can grow almost any vegetable, even a miniature watermelon. I grow watermelons that are about the size of navel oranges. They're little tiny fairy melons. So I'm fascinated by this because it's not affected by weather. You can even have them indoors and buy units that have light sources around them, or you can put them in your garden. So this is an area where I'm looking into because I love to grow a variety of vegetables called brassicas. Those are your winter cruciferous vegetables, your cauliflower and your cabbages. Because I lived in Germany, I fell in love with Brussels sprouts. And these vegetables have been attacked by frost in my climate every year. And it doesn't come in the winter when they're growing and they can handle the frost. It comes in the spring and April where the plant is most vulnerable. And we've had 3 years where the temperature fell to 17 degrees 3 to 5 nights in a row, killed my entire winter crops. So I'm really looking at moving indoors because weather is changing when and how we grow food. In Georgia, we used to plant our winter vegetables at the end of August, but when you have temperatures that are still 95 and 100, that's not going to work. So I'm finding that I'm planting my winter crop later and later in the year. Sometimes it's end of November. And then comes April, and when I should be harvesting the vegetables, a frost comes in and destroys them. So we have to come up with new ways to combat weather.
On that note, I thank you for an exquisite conversation. I really appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing. I think you're going to have to come back and talk to me again.
I
Thanks,
would love
Veronica.
it. My pleasure.
Veronica and her gardening friends are happy to answer your questions. She will respond to your questions about growing vegetables and gardening. Veronica has a passion for providing education to the public. Master gardeners like Veronica address topics related to plant science, weed identification, environmentally conscious ways to control plant diseases and pests. Her mission is to encourage people to grow their own vegetables and flowering gardens. So make sure to post your questions in the comments section and remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching.